Hey folks, G.I. Sanders here from NTX Vinyl. I'm going to forego the pleasantries in the intro and all of that because this actually isn't my content or isn't my video. I think what you call this is a reaction video. I've seen it done plenty of times, normally when people are listening to a song and reacting to it. But in this case, it's a video. If you're following me at NTX Vinyl or anybody in the vinyl community on YouTube, any of the different shop owners or collectors that talk about records, you probably already know Dillon from Noble Records. He owns a great shop in North Carolina, and I think as far as YouTubers go in the vinyl community, is one of the best in regards to his content and his just point of view and the way he goes about his business. Right. So if you're not familiar with Dillon and his shop and channel Noble Records, please follow. You're about to see one of his videos that he just posted. Full disclosure, I don't watch a lot of Dillon's videos. In fact, I don't watch hardly any videos that have to do with records or the vinyl industry because I learned really early on, if I consume all of that content, then it gets really difficult for me to come up with my own original content. So I typically stay away from it. But when I saw this video pop up in my feed, and the genesis of it, or the thumbnail, if you will, about it's not as fun as it used to be, that being collecting records, talking about the pros and cons, it really caught my eye, and I had to click on it because I'm like, is he talking about what I think he's talking about? And sure enough, he is. Within 5 minutes of the video, I was really, really entertained and laughing because everything that Dillon says that you're about to hear, it's come out of my mouth in the last 6 to 12 months, especially the last couple months, but even going back over the last year, because I've been seeing all of the same stuff he's going to talk about. And the funniest part was my wife was in the other room and was kind of overhearing the first couple minutes, and she literally said, "This sounds like exactly what you always say." I said, "Yeah, sure does." So as the video goes on, there are several moments where I flat out agree and have a very similar point of view and opinion. There's a few things that I do want to add a little context to. And so I thought, man, well, I'll just play Dillon's video and react to it. So this is a reaction video from Dillon's video about the pros and cons of record collecting in 2024. As well as his overall point of view in regards to how fun the hobby is right now from his perspective. And I will certainly chime in from my perspective, and there's a lot of parallels. So I'm going to watch the video with you. I've got Dillon in my ear, so let's get into it. I probably won't play the whole thing, but I'm gonna pinpoint a few segments and a few topics that he touches on that I want to embellish on. So here's Dillon from Noble Records talking about the pros and cons of record collecting in 2024. Let's get into it.
Hey guys, Dillon from Noble Records coming at you with another video. So this is a topic that's kind of been heavy on my mind the past few months especially, but I mean, it's always been on my mind. And that's kind of like the direction of record collecting. I've heard a lot of people say, it's not as fun as it used to be, type of thing. And sometimes I agree. Sometimes I can feel that for sure. But I did a live stream kind of talking about this, just kind of like how record collecting is changing and like the effect that has on us as collectors and all that. I thought I would kind of voice my opinion of what I've seen, talk about it just a little bit. Everybody knows huge influx of record collectors in 2020, obviously, because everyone's trapped at home and all that. But I started noticing, so there was uptake, like a roller coaster. And at some point we got to the top and
So yes, absolutely, hockey stick growth. It's easy to look back now and go, oh man, it was such a bubble. But I'll tell you, when you're in the middle of that bubble and you're consumed by it and you are just inundated with records and demand for records, and the inventory was low, and the creation of all that FOMO, fear of missing out, back between 2020 and 2023, I would say, is like the very tail end of it. It was a true bubble.
So I started noticing in the beginning of the year probably that I'm getting a lot of collections for people that got into it in 2020 and they got like maybe 1,000 really good records, 300 really good records, whatever. And then now, as life has gotten back to normal and they're not stuck at home anymore and they're going out to concerts and they're going on vacation and they're moving and they're spending more time with friends, they realize, hey, I'm not a long term record person. I may be done, you know? So I've gotten, like, past 2 months, I've got a bunch. And so I'm seeing that's happening to me, but it's happening to all shops probably around the US.
I can confirm I have been approached with countless collection, more than I can count on my hands and toes over the last year, from people that exact scenario. In most cases, it's people buying reissues. In many of those cases, it's people buying from Walmart, where they saw a limited edition. They saw it was colored, and they're like, "Oh, I thought records were black. There's a colored version that says limited edition." And like you said, now they're like, really not for me. It was a fun little thing, but I'm not really listening to them. I never really invested into it. I didn't get committed to it. But now, I've got 50 or 100 or a couple hundred records. And the reality is, it's really hard to turn those around and recoup your investment. I've talked about how to resell records a lot, and I can echo that sentiment as another US based shop.
And so that is changing the market because there's all of a sudden like an influx of reissues and stuff that was probably fairly easy to find, like in 2020, it was, if you could find a Buckingham Nicks or whatever, I'm just thinking of random records that were kind of tough to find and ended up going up in price. It was supply and demand. There wasn't a lot out there, but over the years, so many people have started businesses selling records. They've gone around, they've dug up records, they bought collections, and a lot of records have come out of the woodwork.
I will say, in regards to the supply and demand, which is a real thing, it's funny being in and involved in the music industry for the majority of my adult life on some level. It's funny how slow the industry is to react. When this whole thing hit in 2020, now granted, no one knew the pandemic was going to hit and stick around as long as it did and cause what it caused. But you would think, from the success of things like Record Store Day for many years leading up to 2020, the momentum that the vinyl industry had. I started NTX Vinyl before the pandemic and had tons of good momentum. The labels were still paying very little attention to it and completely got caught off guard with the huge influx of demand. Now, I'm not saying they could have expected what COVID brought, of course, but again, it's just kind of another example of the music industry being multiple steps behind the consumer.
To, appease the masses. And now the market's cooling off a little bit. A bunch of people are selling off their collections. And so it sometimes feels a little bit like, oh, what is going on? For me, it's my worst nightmare that it was just one day everybody would wake up and nobody would care about records anymore. And then I'm like, crap, what do I do now? I guess I'll go back to work. Get a real job.
No, don't do that. Don't go back to work. Stay with the music, man. It's where your passion is. Figure out a way to coexist with something you love. Find something you love and figure out a way to monetize it and turn it into work. That's what you've done. That's what I've done. And I have no doubt that you'll continue to do that.
That's my worst nightmare. That's not going to happen. But so anyways, to think about, but for me and my own personal collecting, a lot of times I'm like, man, this is not as fun as it used to be. Like, it used to be so fun. Like, I wake up every day like, what can I find today, And sometimes that is still that way, but sometimes it's not. And I mean, I'm just sharing my opinion. Obviously, my experience is a lot different than most of your experiences because I own a shop and a record label, and I just see it from the other side. And, once you see how the sausage is made.
So as someone else who sees it from the other side, who owns a shop, a different shop, but a shop, and a record label, different like a record label, but very niche as well. Yeah, it's like anything. Once you do something over and over and over the course of a couple years, it starts to wear on you. It starts to become the norm, and the norm is typically a very bad thing. Well, I take that back. For me, it is. Some people are totally fine to sit in that space, but for me, and it sounds like for Dillon, it's all about always looking for a challenge, which is a part of like hunting for records. and always looking to be engaged with what you're working with. And it's a lot harder to stay engaged with the business, the industry, when the consumers themselves, you, aren't as engaged with it, aren't buying as much, aren't buying as much, aren't watching as much, aren't clicking as much, just because again everyone's busy, everyone's kind of moved on past that honeymoon period that we were in between 2023, that type of thing.
You know what I mean? Like I get so many records that it's not nearly as romantic anymore. And it's very rare that I find a record that I'm not surprised to see. You know what I'm saying? Or that I am surprised to see. Like used to, I'd buy a collection and it would be like chock full of like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Stones, Pink Floyd, David Bowie, Jimi Hendrix, all this stuff, and I'd be like, wow. And now it's just like another Tuesday. You know, it happens all the time. Not that I don't appreciate it. I do love it. I appreciate it. I'm glad that I can sell it to my
Yeah, it's
customers.
the reality of it. The more you see something, the more, and this speaks back to my a lot of my videos where I talk about rarity, because everyone's like, "Is that a rare record?" It's like, man, if you see tons and tons of records on a daily basis, what's actually rare really starts to present itself. Because when you see those types of artists that Dylan's talking about it, which are, classic artists that will exist and should exist and be at the forefront of music conversation forever, the Beatles, Zeppelin, those types of things. I still love to see him, but he's right. It's just not near as exciting once you've discovered your 250th copy of Led Zeppelin 3. Like the first few times you're like, "Oh, this one's amazing. The pinwheel works on it." And now you've seen it hundreds of times and you realize how common that is. So it's a thing, and it's part of growing with the hobby. And if you're a record store owner and you've owned a store for 20, 30 years, I'm preaching to the choir, of course. But for someone like myself who's only been in it for a few years, or from the business side, it's one of those things you're just starting to get used to after a few years.
But there's nothing in it for me. I'm not taking any of that stuff home. You know, so lately I've been selling out of my collection more than I've been buying. But anyways, all that to say, I want to talk about kind of the pros and cons. So I went on Instagram, and you can I forget what it's called, but you put up kind of like a poll thing, and people can respond anonymously. So I said, hey, it was two questions. One was, what is great about record collecting in 2024? And one was, what sucks or what is bad about collecting records in 2024? And so it's funny, really funny, the answers, because a lot of them are the same for both categories. And I'll go through it and show you. But I feel that on both ends, but there's a few that are very common denominators that I also feel. So I'll show you the pros and cons that everybody said on social media.
I think that's funny because it's so true. It's all about perspective, whether you're talking about rarity or whether you're talking about pros and cons. Like, some people are into this hobby because there are multiple color variants and they love the visual of it and they love to collect the different versions. Some people hate that part of this hobby. Just as an example, right? The variants and those types of things. You could go, whether we're talking about reissues, whether we're talking about, Dylan's going to talk about the influx of flippers or the prices or all this stuff. But it's very interesting that he points out that so many people said that certain things were a pro, and then other people said the exact same thing as a con. Again, that's because of our perspective as shop owners, as collectors, as people who have been in the hobby for just a few weeks or months versus years.
I'll show you kind of my pros and cons as well, and they line up. They're pretty similar. I think that everybody kind of feels the same way. The cons, I'll start with the cons, are the prices. Everybody, like, that was the number one thing everybody said. The prices are crazy now, and they are. I get that, but having we just reissued Underground Fire, which, if you don't have that record, it's available on our website. You should grab it. It was expensive to do. I could not have done that 5 years ago. There's no way I would have had the money to put out a record, and it's not like they don't let you wait to pay them until the record's done. You got to pay up front, like tens of thousands of dollars, or maybe more. But for me, it was a lot of money that I had to put up front so I could have this record made. And, a lot of people and labels and stuff, they work off of pre-orders. I didn't do that because you don't know how much it's going to cost in the end. So I had no idea how much it was going to cost. Now that I've done it once, I probably would have a better idea. But I don't like doing pre-orders. I don't like to receive money for something that I don't even have yet.
So that's interesting, just from a perspective standpoint. So for my label, the DFW Legacy Series, which is a small niche, we only press a couple hundred records of each of our titles because it's very unique, and that's just what matches the demand we found. But we do everything via pre-order because for us, the pre-order is a mechanism not only because it defers our payment, but for us, we want to make sure and press the right amount. And this will get into the conversation around FOMO and limited edition and flippers that Dillon's about to get to. But for us, we'd rather put up a pre-order and have 225 people pre-order it. And then we know we should only press 300. But if, 400 people pre-order it, then we can press 500. It's about figuring out what that right number is so that we can make sure everyone who knows about it can get a copy. And then also it stays in print for a little bit and is not immediately sold out, because if it's immediate sold out, then that's where the secondary market comes in. And then people get really upset because they find out about it a couple months after it was announced. So for us, the pre-order is actually not a bad thing. It's a mechanism that helps the consumer because we can define the right number to press, which is always one of the hardest parts when you're making a record. Believe me, I don't care if you're a tiny indie label like me and me and my team, the DFW Legacy Series, or if you're a huge major label. Determining the number to press to match the demand of the market is really, really difficult, and a lot of labels get it wrong, especially if you don't really have a good pulse on the vinyl market.
So I had to front the money, huge amount of money to get these done, and it's expensive to make these records, and then they don't all sell right away, so it's an investment, all this stuff. So materials have gone up in price. I mean, everybody knows this. Materials have gone up. That's how it is. Everything, it's inflation. It's cost of materials, cost of living, whatever. We're not going to get into all that. You guys understand that. Try buying a house 10 years ago versus buying a house now. Talk about prices. But anyways, but also, and I've done this calculator before. You can go on and do an inflation calculator. You look at a price tag on a record that came out in the 70s and do an inflation calculator, how much that would be now. It's the same price.
So this is something I've talked about recently with just amongst other collectors, the inflation calculator. He's exactly right. Go to any inflation calculator online and put in what it cost to buy a record in 1980, $7-8, and sure as hell, it'll extrapolate out and it'll be $32 or whatever it is, right on par with what a normal record costs today, new record. Here's the problem. Perspective. In 1980 or whatever, people paid $8 for that record. It was the only way to hear that music. The only way. You had to go to a physical record store. You had to spend your money, no matter if you were a child or an adult, to buy that record, because other than hearing, catching the song on the radio, or obviously seeing the band live if they come to your city, the only way to hear that music, the only way to hear the album in full was to buy that album. 2024, do the inflation math. Let's say it equates to $30 for a single LP, which is pretty standard these days. $25-30 for a new record, single LP. That equates when you do it in the calculator. But now, do people need to spend their $25-30 to hear that record? No, absolutely not. They can stream it for free. They can go to YouTube. There's a million different places to get access to that music for free ad nauseum. So the perspective of buyers is completely skewed, and that is not taken into account on the inflation calculator, because in 1978 it was pay $8, or 1980, whatever. It was pay $8 to hear the music or don't hear the music. And now it's pay $30 to hear the music on vinyl, or pay nothing and stream it for free all day long. Two completely different situations based on how technology has evolved, and the inflation calculator does not take any of that account. So I always put an asterisk by that whole inflation calculator because it does not take that into consideration.
So I'm not saying it's not a valid concern. It is, but the prices go with everything. It's, loaf of bread goes up, record goes up, same thing.
And so, yeah, again, when you're comparing it to a loaf of bread or things like that, it just doesn't equate. If you want a loaf of bread, you got to pay for that loaf of bread. There's no way to get it for free. I can get the music for free all day long. And so when someone looks at $30 now versus $0, that feels like $100 versus zero, right? Because you're like, why would I drop $30 on the music when I can stream it for free? That's what non-collectors say, right? Because they don't understand that there's so much more involved with the experience of owning your music and playing your music right. So again, perspective, so important.
So, prices were the big one, and I do, like I said, I do get that. And some records are crazy. Like you're getting reissues that are $60, $80, and that's bananas. You know what I mean? That's a lot of money, to be spending on a reissue, like record store day stuff like that. It's like, what the heck?
So $60, $80, record store day prices, which continue to go up every single year. My opinion, and it's only my opinion, is that the major labels, which are the ones that control the majority of the reissues, the back catalog, even newer artists who aren't independent, who are established, obviously, um, you know, the Universals and the Sonys and the Warners of the world. There's only a couple of them. I think they are pushing this entire market to be a collector's market. And when I say collectors, I'm not saying just people who collect because they actually listen and they're in the hobby for years and years. I think they're pushing it to be a high-end collectibles market, like sneakers and like sports cards and like all these things. I think they want it to be much more limited, create a lot more FOMO on normal releases, not just RSD. I think they've been looking at RSD as the template, as the example, and going, hey, if you can charge that for an RSD release, why not charge it for a normal release? And let's just limit all of them. Let's just, instead of pressing 5,000 and keeping it in print for years and putting a normal price on it, because we're getting it for much lower. Obviously, the more you press, the less you pay per album. Let's just limit it, do smaller batches, do them in different colors, do an anniversary every year or 5 years, and create more FOMO and keep raising the prices. I think that's what labels are doing. It's another example of the music industry just tearing itself apart at the seams. And we'll see, hopefully not dismantling the whole physical media market, which is a very small niche of the broader picture for these labels.
Another one is the reissues. There's too many reissues. There's reissues everywhere. Reissues coming out my ears. You don't know. The next one is pressing quality. You don't know what you're getting. Blah 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 blah. I hear this all the time. Like there's no quality control. The pressing quality sucks. All this and all that. I will say with that, now the record collectors and buyers are educated people. I mean, they know what they're doing. Used to, you go to a record store, pick up a record, buy it, and leave. No big deal. You weren't going to research the pressing plant. That's crazy. You wouldn't even be able to access that information, before the internet. Now, you got all these Steve Hoffman forum nerds clicking away telling you all that. You can look it up. You can see where stuff's coming from, what labels are good, what labels are bad, which ones to trust, which ones not to trust, all that stuff. So you kind of know if you want to know.
If you want to know, I think that's the key part here for me, because I think there's a large majority of people who buy records on a regular basis who honestly, I don't know if they don't want to know, but they just don't have the time to know, nor that they really care to dig into the details. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I think the Uber collector, me, maybe you watching a YouTube video about this stuff, certainly Dillon, knows that you can dig in and find all this information. But the normal collector is walking in a store just to pick up a pop record that came out last Friday, or a rock reissue that they remember from when they were a kid. Like, they don't know that there are differences between these things. That naivety is good and bad for the consumer and for the record store. It's something I think the industry is tangling with now, because there are certain labels, audiophile labels, higher end kind of boutique labels, who make a point to divulge the information of where it was pressed, what was the original source, who mastered it, all those great details that are on the hype sticker, right? When you're able to access them. But I don't think that will ever be the case on standard reissues. I get asked all the time when we promote a new release that's coming out, a reissue or a new album, whatever it is. Hey, do you know what playing that game? Hey, do you know what mastered? I don't have any idea. Even our distributor doesn't have any idea. Hell, I could probably go to the label, and the person who was in charge of the project would struggle to tell you who did it all, because they're moving really fast. And the reality is physical media is a tiny part of their business. 90% of the revenue-ish in the music industry comes from streaming. That's what's paying the bills. That's what's paying employees salaries. So this little annoying physical media thing over here that they have to project manage, they're not really concerned on some levels. A lot of people aren't really concerned with making sure it's great. Now, I'm generalizing, of course. Of course, there are people who love this industry, who are in it for the right reasons and who do care. But I think there's plenty of people who don't, and I think that's what's reflected in normal reissues, where all those details are not divulged, and I don't think that'll ever change.
But if you want to keep it simple and you just walk in, you want to buy a Michael Jackson Thriller reissue, and you don't know if they pressed it very well in the back of Walmart. I'm just kidding, um, but the higher quantity that's being pressed, the lower the quality control. It's just the way it is. I would venture to say what I paid for Underground Fire, we did it with Waxworks Record, which is a great pressing plant. I had zero warps. I had no seam splits. It was 100% impeccable. The quality control was unbelievable. It was great.
Perfect example of people who care. I haven't worked with Waxworks specifically, but I've worked with several other pressing plants in the United States, and yeah, a lot of times if there's people there who care and they put TLC into the project, then it can turn out great, and quality control can be a great thing.
But I got 1,500 records pressed. It wasn't like I'm doing 40,000. So, like I said, quantity goes up, quality control kind of goes down. Other pressing plants across the world are just cranking out a product. They don't care what it is. So, but the next one, which this is the one that I feel probably the hardest, and that is flippers. And you know what you're probably saying. Flipper was a very nice dolphin. Not what we're talking about. You also probably saying you're also a flipper, Dillon. You flip records for a living, and I get that, and I consider that. I understand, but I'm not going to justify the way I make a living.
Okay, so this is a big one for me. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, Dillon, because you're not a flipper. The definition of a flipper, and correct me if I'm wrong, the definition of a flipper is, in most cases, generalizing, someone who buys something at retail and then turns around and charges more on top of that retail or that suggested retail price. So if someone goes into a record store, buys a record for $30 because it's the MSRP, the suggested retail price is $30, they turn around and put it on eBay for 75, like people do with Record Store Day and those types of things. That's a flipper. Dillon, what you and I do, we buy at wholesale and then we sell at MSRP. Just like you're saying, how you don't sell things over market value. You try to do your best, whether it's a pre-owned record or a new record, you're always looking at what market value is and you're trying to establish that. For new records, it's easy. There's a suggested retail price that we as record store owners try to stick to. That's why we're not flippers, because we're buying in bulk, wholesale, and there's a ton of work, as everybody knows, that goes along with that. When you're buying in bulk and you're buying hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of records at once, you're buying them for pennies on the dollar, and then you're selling them for the proper market value. Just because you paid $1 and you're selling something for 20, if it's a pre-owned record, you pay $1 for a collection because you bought 1,000 records and you got a great deal and you got them at $1,000. You have to deal with sourcing those, dealing with the collection. You have to deal with inventorying them, moving them, storing them, cleaning them, grading them, pricing all. That's wholesale. We're paying wholesale in order to build a business to sell retail at MSRP. No different than if you're buying 500 new records at a time and you're paying $15 a pop for them, and then you're going to retail them at $24.99. That's not flipping. That is a standard retail business, selling wholesale, buying wholesale, and then selling at MSRP. Completely different than what flippers are doing, where they're coming in and cherry picking, paying retail, and then turning around and marking them up way over the suggested retail price. Two different things, in my opinion.
I do not ever charge more for a record than it should go for. I promise you, I will never do that. I don't ever ask more than it should go for. We look everything up on PopPsych, everything up on Discogs. We will not, we have a reputation at the shop. Ask any of my regulars to come in. We have fair prices. We price everything that is consistent with the market, or less. Like usually if you look whatever we have on Discogs, unless it's some really rare jazz record that's only sold twice in 2017 or something, if it's something that has a good sales history, we're usually below the median on Discogs, because we want to make sure we have a lot of records come in, a lot of records go out. Nothing sticks around too long. We have fresh inventory, all that stuff. So
Again, the difference between maybe a flipper or just a really small seller who's selling a few records here and there. What Dillon's talking about is moving inventory quickly, because the longer a record store sits on a record, if I get a record in, I don't care if it's a $5 record or a $500 record, the longer it stays available for sale, days, weeks, months, the less money we're making off of it, because your profit margin just drops and drops and drops the longer you're sitting on it, right? So that's a big piece of this. As far as sales history, this is an interesting one too. When you look at Pop Psych, you look at Discogs, and this is tricky as a store owner, I'll tell you, and I'd be curious of Dillon's perspective. We're looking at sales history when we're pricing records. I do it right now. I do the same thing. Look it up on Discogs, look what's sold on eBay, which is the same as Pop Psych. But we're looking at that history over the last couple of years. Well, remember the last couple of years was this massive bubble. So it's very interesting pricing records right now, because I can look at Discogs and look what's available, and I can see some things sitting there and going, oh my God, that's never going to sell. That's a 2022 price. That person's going to have that record sitting there forever, because things have calmed down so much. And so it's hard when you look at the value of your collection or the sales history of items that are sold. Now, if they've sold really recently, you can establish, what it's going for in real time today. But let's say there's sales history, let's say the sales history dates back and there's only been a couple of something that has sold over the last couple of years, and it's hard to really gauge. It's like, should I put, a 2021 price on a record in 2024 because there's only been a couple sold, or should I adjust knowing what has happened to the entire market as a whole? It's really tricky.
all that to say, we buy record collections and we sell them, but that's really not the same. It is the same as flipping as far as you're getting technical about the term.
Not in my opinion. Like I said, we buy records at wholesale. We don't buy at retail, which is what flippers do.
But what they're talking about with flippers are people that will go, like I have people that go on my website, like when I do Underground Fire and the pinwheel variant, which was, we only had 200. I had a bunch of people buy them and immediately throw them up on eBay, Discogs for hundreds of dollars, whatever. And same with, like, we did Fraction Moonblood. We did 1,000 of those. They sold out in 24 hours. And immediately when I started mailing them out, they were popping up on Discogs, they were popping up on eBay, and the people are literally just buying them so they can double, triple, quadruple the price, and they feed off of people's desperation. You got people that were in work, they couldn't step aside to, or they didn't get the notification or whatever, and they weren't able to get it. And so there's somebody that really wants that record, and then instead somebody else got the record that doesn't even care about it, and they're just basically buying it to flip it. It's the kind of the nature of how that money is made, I think, that is just kind of hard for people.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say about flipping is it's like, it ain't going away. And it's not unique to vinyl. It's not unique to this hobby at all. It's in every industry, and it always will. There will always be a secondary market. Go look at concert tickets. Go look at Pokemon cards. Go look at Beanie Babies. Go look at Legos. I could go on and on and on. Anything that has a certain amount of shelf life, because, you're not going to flip a loaf of bread because it's always available. They're always producing it. But if it's a Lego set, or if it's a Disney backpack, or if it's a Taylor Swift anything, they're limited in quantity on some level because of manufacturing, and you can only make so many of things at once. And when things run out and they're not for sale anymore, that's when the secondary market comes into play. It's a tough pill to swallow. Is it detrimental to the vinyl hobby at this point, where I think people are bailing because of it, or not as excited, or not having as much fun collecting because of flippers? I honestly don't think so. I think it's just part of it. I think it's part of trying to get the record. Can it be defeating? Can it be like an ass whip to go through the scenario he just described, where you try and buy a record, it sells out immediately, you barely miss out, and then a day later they're 3 times the price because that flipper paid retail and now marked it up 3 times above retail? That's a beat down for everybody, especially for real fans who want the music. But it's just the nature of this business, because we are dealing with physical things that have limitations in regards to quantity. There will never, ever be a scenario where there are millions of every record available and you can buy them anytime you want. There is simply not enough warehouses in the world. There are not enough people to manufacture that many records. So it will always be a thing. Unfortunately, to me, I think you just have to get used to it and get past it and be patient, because eventually, maybe not in Dillon's case because he's pressing some really obscure stuff, and same with my label, some really obscure stuff, but most of the mainstream stuff, most of popular music that most people want to add to their collection is going to be available at some point in time. It's just a matter of being patient, which is hard.
And I remember seeing it with record store day stuff. I remember when I would go to record store day, I'd have people there. They would be people just like, you could tell they didn't care about the music, they didn't care about the records, they didn't care about the community. I don't know if this is bad like this is there's no way it is now. I don't know. We don't do record store day. We did it once, but this was like 2012-ish, 2013-ish, when some of those record store day exclusives were going for like, you could get it for $20, and then later on you look on eBay, they're going for $100. It was crazy. So you had people in there that figured all that out, and they were in there grabbing, and they had giant stacks and stuff, and they were aggressive and they were rude, and you could tell that's what they were doing. That's kind of like what we're talking about. People that are really only in it for the money. And I promise you guys, for me, and not that it matters, but I'm not in it for the money. I mean, obviously, I have to feed my family, but I love what I do.
I'm going to end it there. And Dillon, don't apologize, because you are in it for the right reasons. Like, nobody who owns a record, or again, generalizing, most people who own record shops or who own or work at pressing plants or work at record labels, whether it's independent or major label, anybody involved in this industry, for the most part, except for the very upper echelon of mega stars, and the people who get to work with those mega stars, everyone else who's in this industry, I don't care what side you're on, if you're on retail, distribution, manufacturing, no one's getting rich off this stuff. We're doing it because it's an industry we love, because we get to touch music, we get to feel music, we get to be involved with music, and that's what I think people appreciate about Dillon's channel, hopefully my channel, and other YouTube channels where there are people who really care about this, because it gives us the opportunity to stay close to something we love. So I thought this was just a really great video. By all means, subscribe to Dillon's channel, Noble Records. Watch the rest of it. There's another 10-15 minutes of it where he talks about more pros and cons, which are great. But I think I'll stop it there, because that first 10-15 minutes of this video is what really caught me, and I just found myself saying, man, every word that's coming out of your mouth, I've said myself. And so I just felt the need to do a simple reaction to that. So thanks for watching, Dillon. I hope you don't mind that I did this. I've never done one of these kind of reaction videos before. It was kind of fun, and I felt the need to reach out to validate so much of what you're saying. And I think more than anything, it's just nice to know that I'm not crazy, because I've been thinking this stuff and saying it. And my team will tell you, the people around me, my friends and family, who are constantly always asking, how's the business doing? How's NTX Vinyl? Like, this is the conversation I've been having with people in close-knit circles for the last year. So it's awesome to know that I'm not alone. Thanks for watching, as always. Appreciate Dillon for letting me mooch off his video. I'll try and get some new videos up on our channel here soon on our Talking About Records series. My name is GI, and we'll see you again next time.